Back in November 2023, I had 10,000 subscribers and I was hoping very optimistically to reach 12,000 by the end of the year. It's the 23rd of December 2023 as I'm recording this script, and I already have 15,364 subscribers, mainly thanks to a couple of my videos I've linked in this video's description. So now it's time for my 15,000 subscriber thanks video, and as usual, I'm answering questions you've asked me. Without giving away more personal info than you are fully 100% comfortable with, what's your background? Specific field of specialization, specific areas of focus, favorite materials, least favorite parts of history to study? What do you consider your own personal strengths and weaknesses as a student of history to be? I thought I'd start with this and give a brief biographical statement containing information which is already public in various places, and most of which I've already communicated in previous videos as well as in my Discord server. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Classics, including learning Greek and Latin to a basic degree, and a Master of Information Management and Systems. During my bachelor degree, I was fortunate to be taught during the time when post-colonial studies had recently emerged as a field, so my first year of history education was on nationalism, imperialism, and revolution from a post-colonial perspective. We covered the struggles of the indigenous peoples of Canada, India, South Africa, New Zealand, and Kenya, as well as the nationalist and revolutionary independence movements in Ireland. The course was a great introduction to the post-colonial perspective, and it's that perspective which dominates my history videos as a result. I currently teach photography and media studies part-time at Ming Chuan University in Taipei, the capital of Taiwan, where I've lived since 2004. So I'm a first-generation immigrant in Taiwan, and since I was a second-generation immigrant in Australia, where I was born, I've basically been an immigrant all my life. I'm also a technical writer and patent editor with 18 years of experience, and teach English and literary analysis at a couple of cram schools. I was a research assistant at National Taiwan University of Science and Technology for a couple of years, mainly doing research and teaching undergrads and postgrads how to do academic research and how to write academic work for submission to scholarly publications. I've been involved in volunteer work in non-government organizations for marginalized people, including 2 orphanages and an HIV shelter and halfway home for orphans, undocumented migrants, abuse victims, and other marginalized people, as well as volunteering for one of Taiwan's largest social welfare organizations. I've also been involved in volunteer work in Taiwan's indigenous communities for 12 years. I was one of the founding members of 2 NGOs serving Aboriginal and minority groups, and I spent a year learning the Skuliak dialect of Dayen, one of the main Aboriginal languages, though my pronunciation isn't always consistent since many of my Atayal friends speak the Suli dialect, which influences my pronunciation. In 2015, one of my photos was awarded 3rd prize in the National Macapa Arts Award for Arts and Photography of Indigenous People, and in 2018, one of my photos was given a commendation in the same award. I attended the 2014 Sunflower Student Movement protests for several weeks, documenting the event with photos and video, and conversing with the protesters in order to communicate their aims and motivation to the Anglosphere, since mainstream media reporting of the event was significantly biased and highly inadequate. During those events, I was present at the student break-in to the Executive Yuan, one of Taiwan's government buildings. I've also supported the ongoing Indigenous Getagalan Boulevard protest, a public Aboriginal land back demonstration which started in 2017. It's very similar to the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Australia. Now to those more specific questions. Specific field of specialization, specific areas of focus? I'd say Middle Ages to the modern period. Favorite materials? I wasn't sure what this meant. If you meant primary or secondary sources, then honestly I'd have to say secondary. I'd love to be able to say primary, but I don't flatter myself that I have the requisite training and experience for any degree of academic level specialization in primary sources, even in English. Least favorite parts of history to study? I don't really have any. What do you consider your own personal strengths and weaknesses as a student of history to be? In terms of strengths, I'm a natural systematizer. I have academic training in information management and systems, academic knowledge of historiography, academic experience in scholarly research and in being published in academia, and I can happily grind away at a vast amount of reading material for hours on end to find, assess, and integrate the information I need. In terms of weaknesses, the fact that I can only really read academic literature in English. When it comes to Greek and Latin primary sources, I can generally scrape by with my own knowledge, plus a lexicon and a commentary. And when it comes to Chinese, I can do a bit better, but still leaning heavily on lexicons and commentary. But I really need translation for pretty much everything else. There's a massive volume of historical source material which still isn't available in English translation. There's also so much good academic literature in languages other than English, especially German, French, Italian, Spanish, and Chinese. How do you organize your time in order to produce a large quantity of well-researched videos with your work life, your social life, and your other hobbies? Well, I've dropped all my other hobbies, except photography, which I unfortunately have little time for now. As for social life, I'll go out with a friend once or twice a month, and about twice a month, a couple of my friends visit to check up on me and sometimes stay overnight, which I always appreciate. I don't have the usual kind of social life. I just don't have time for it. I have people supporting me on Patreon, and if I'm not doing research for a video, I feel agitated that I'm not giving them value. So that motivates me to spend most of my free time in research, script writing, and video production. Mainly research. In terms of my career, I do paid work 7 days a week, and although that sometimes means spending 12 hours at work in a day, and sometimes means only 3 hours at work in a day, it's still a lot of time overall each week, especially when you take into account unpaid work that I need to do at home, such as grading university assignments. If you're a member of my Discord, you'll know I sleep very little. What have been the benefits and drawbacks of running your channel? Would you recommend becoming a YouTuber? Firstly, I am not really a YouTuber. I'm a person with full-time work who occasionally makes videos for YouTube. I would consider myself a YouTuber if I was earning a living from my YouTube work. Secondly, I would not recommend becoming a YouTuber to anyone, nor would I recommend anyone attempt what I am doing, at least the unmonetized way I'm doing it, unless they have a lot more time than I do and they have a significant disposable income. As of 2023, only 1.7% of all YouTube channels have at least 10,000 subscribers. So I'm already in the top 2%, and it's taken me 4 years to get that far. That's a pretty pathetic return on investment. So no, I wouldn't recommend you do this, aside from those caveats I mentioned previously. So let's start with drawbacks. I've already talked about the social costs, but my channel also costs me money on a monthly basis, since I pay for an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription so I can use Adobe Audition to record my audio, Photoshop and Lightroom to edit my images, and After Effects to create the videos. I have an academic subscription, so that typically only costs me around $350 a year. I've also bought numerous stock video, image, and video collections, as well as a wide variety of plugins to automate my video production process. That has cost me a couple of $1,000s in the last 4 years. I sometimes commission custom art for my channel. In October and November this year, I spent $700 on custom 3D assets for a project I hope to launch next year, $350 of which went to a talented 3D artist I commissioned. And this month I paid a very gifted composer $500 for a bespoke musical work for the channel. I fully believe in paying artists what they ask for, and I think many of them are underpaid because real creativity like theirs is extremely valuable. I'm just a systematizer. They're actually making something. Good art is expensive, which is why a channel's quality of art and video production tends to be in proportion to the channel's size and income. Occasionally, I have research-related expenses. 6 months ago, I paid for a subscription for the news service Ground News because I want to review it in the future, which requires using it personally long term. In November this year, I paid a translator $75 for the translation of some very old German text, including some very difficult to understand 19th century German in black letter text, for a video I hope to make next year. And this month, I also paid for a subscription to the online edition of the New Scientist magazine, so I could review their articles and assess their quality for a series of videos I'm making on pop history and pop science services. So it's not unusual for this channel to cost me a couple of $1,000 a year. Now let's look at the advantages. I've been able to convert some of my YouTube scripts into scholarly articles and presentations which have been published, cited, or presented in academia. I converted the script of my video on designer Viktor Antonov and architect Lebbeus Woods into a presentation I gave at the Anarchist Studies Network 7th Conference in August 2022. I converted the working version of a script for a video on why museums display fakes, which I haven't made yet, into a presentation I gave at the Central European University Conference Medievalisms on the Screen 3, Digital Medievalisms and the Teaching of History, in April this year. I converted the script of my 2 videos on Smangus, an Aboriginal Christian anarcho-collectivist community in Taiwan, into a paper which has been accepted for publication in the Anarchist Studies Journal for next year. I converted part of the script for my 3 videos on the Black Pygmy myth into a chapter which was accepted for inclusion in the forthcoming work Seeking the Kokota'ai, an ethnography of the elusive little men of Taiwan, to be published by the University of Central Lancashire next year. I converted the script of my videos critiquing Philosophy Tube's video on Ethiopian philosopher Zera Yacob into a paper which I haven't had formally published yet, but which has been cited as an unpublished paper in a book by a scholar who has encouraged me to submit it for publication, and said that meanwhile they are happy to promote the unpublished paper in their academic network of Afro-Asian critical psychology. So that's an advantage. Of course, on the other hand, I could have done all that research myself without adding all the time and expense of turning it into videos, and maybe just entered academia as a career instead, which may have been of greater benefit. But I like to think of my work as having a greater impact if it's distributed online. Having said which, it's never easy to determine exactly what kind of impact work like this has, and obviously a channel the size mine currently is has an impact which is indisputably negligible. So overall, if I was back at the point where I was deciding whether or not to start a YouTube channel, I wouldn't. I'd keep my hobbies and social life, keep my money, continue my personal research in my free time, and then get that research published in academia, maybe picking up another degree or a small academic position along the way. Realistically, this channel has been overwhelmingly a phenomenal cost to me and almost no benefit. But at this point, I feel I'm rather trapped by the fact that I now have an audience of some size, and I feel obligated to distribute through this channel the research I'm doing anyway. So I guess it's too late for regret at this point. And again, I do have a number of very generous patrons, most of whom have been faithful supporters for at least 2 years, some of them even more, to whom I am extremely grateful. They give me a lot of moral support, even when they don't communicate directly. When they do communicate directly, they are invariably hugely encouraging and supportive. I feel very obligated to them, and that's one of the reasons why I keep the channel going. My Discord server has recently also increased dramatically in size, and I get a massive amount of moral support from them. I've made a number of really good friends on that server, and I fully appreciate every member. Next question. As a bit of an odd aside, I am curious about your sense of humor. Do you have any favorite movies, shows, or comedians? I have an absurdist and slightly cynical sense of humor with an appreciation for satire, having been raised on authors such as Ambrose Bierce, P.G. Wodehouse, H.H. Munro, and James Thurber. I don't really have a favorite comedian. Favorite movies include 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I think hasn't aged a day, either cinematically or visually, the original Blade Runner of 1984, and Blade Runner 2049, which reminds me I do need to finish my script for the video explaining how YouTuber The Cavernacle misunderstands the history of both Cyberpunk and Blade Runner. I also enjoy some of the more fringe movies like Skinamarink and No One Will Save You. Classic favourite TV shows include Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, which were satirical commentaries on the British civil service and parliamentary system made in the early 1980s, which I saw on release. And modern favourite TV shows include Utopia, which is indisputably one of the greatest TV shows of all time and an absolute masterpiece of British filmmaking. How did you know to learn good history? Largely from my undergraduate degree, in which we were taught proper historiographical method, and our lecturers did a great job explaining how to read primary sources critically, as well as how to use secondary sources. Since then, I've also read academic works on historiographical method and on the process of scholarly research. Can you make a video on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Definitely not now, but can you make it like 6 months after the Israeli-Hamas war finishes? If you're in my Discord, you'll know that earlier this year I was working on a video explaining how Holocaust deniers are case studies in bad research practices and how learning to deconstruct their arguments leads to a better understanding of historiographical methodology and how to assess sources properly. However, with the Hamas action in October and Israel's predictably genocidal response, I completely shelved that video since Israel is weaponizing the history of the Holocaust in a completely immoral way, and I don't want to be seen as a part of that. Unfortunately, that video's either just going to have to wait for a much later date, or I'm going to have to do it a different way. And again, if you're in my Discord, you'll know that instead, I've started working on examining the Jewish Virtual Library's historical narrative of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, contrasting it with a narrative of Palestinian history given to me by one of my Discord members, and showing how this Palestinian narrative identifies the way in which the Jewish Virtual Library's narrative has some extremely misleading gaps, while at the same time, the Palestinian narrative itself shows some occasional gaps as well. However, as I explained in my Discord, the aim of this video is, quote, not to draw a false equivalence of they're both as bad as each other, end quote. It feels bizarre quoting myself, and it feels even stranger that this is a video I'm making with virtually no citations. So instead, the video I'm planning to make will demonstrate how to address conflicting sources in historiography, while also showing how we must take into account the background of our sources when assessing how they communicate their respective narratives. For instance, the Jewish Virtual Library's account is the politically crafted history of a triumphalist oppressive nation state, while the Palestinian account is the reclaimed history of the oppressed. Both narratives may be omitting information, but for very different reasons, in very different ways, and with extremely different degrees of justification. Making that video will take literally months, but at least I've made a start. Next question, and this is a long one. You told many viewers and YouTubers not to study too much of a wide range of topics in history, because this may result in less specialized videos and therefore worse history. Yet you do a wide range of topics. One video you'll be talking about the Opium Wars, the next you'll be talking about Hitler was not a socialist, and then you'll be talking about Gnosticism. Do I misunderstand what you are saying about a wide range of topics? Okay, so there are several issues here. I actually said it's very hard for one YouTuber to produce consistently high quality work on a wide range of topics at any depth at a reasonably high speed, like more than once a month. And for that reason, it's a lot easier and more practical to specialize, especially if you want to produce high quality work in volume. And I still stand by that. There are channels which can do this, such as the channel Schwerpunkt, but he's a literal university lecturer with about 10 years of lecture notes, which he just converts into YouTube videos. He has already done the hard research work over years and years of academic reading and writing, and his videos largely consist of reading his lecture notes. So he already has high quality content on a range of topics related to the European migration era, which he can upload at a reasonably high volume with a high level of detail and quality. Having said which, it's still extremely difficult for me to produce even the videos I do. My videos often take me weeks or even months to research. I can barely produce one video a month, let alone one a week like some channels do. Another issue is that many of my videos are fact-checking claims made by other people, which takes a lot less time than creating an entire in-depth video on the subject from scratch myself. Often it's just a case of looking up their sources and seeing how they've misrepresented them. Another issue is that I don't do a lot of original research for each video. I do a lot of systematizing of existing research, often starting with tertiary sources describing a scholarly consensus, then reading secondary literature to understand how that consensus was formed. That takes a lot less time than doing original research. Now, many of my videos do involve my own original research to a greater or lesser extent, such as those on the Nazis and socialism, on the Black Pygmy myth, on the Islamic Golden Age, on Zero Yacob, on my videos responding to Tick on Gnosticism, and on some others, but I'm not regularly producing entire videos consisting almost exclusively of my own original research directly from primary sources. And that's how I'm able to cover a wide range of topics. I hope that helps. What plans do you have for 2024? I'd like to complete some of my currently outstanding series first and start a new project I've been working on for over a year, telling a real historical narrative through actual spoken dialogue and 3D visuals. I might talk about that another time. Next question, and this is theological from a Discord member who knows I'm a Christian. How do you deal with the fact that there is a lot of violence, death, genocide of the Canaanites, and murder of polytheists and homosexuals in the Bible when you and I are quite progressive nowadays? I understand the Bronze Age was a different time compared to the 21st century, but still, even though I am not a Christian, you are, so I wonder what you think about this. Well, firstly, when you're talking about that, you're talking about the Old Testament and the Law of Moses, and the fact is the Law of Moses isn't binding on Christians. That's literally one of the major issues which first differentiated Christianity as a new Jewish sect, and one of the issues which contributed to what scholars have referred to as the parting of the ways. Note that's quite a debated term, which was the eventual development of Christianity from a Jewish sect into a completely different religion. Now, I know that might seem like a cop-out, but it isn't if you look at it historically. The indisputable fact is that by the time of the 1st century, there was already a significant trend within Second Temple period Judaism of regarding the Old Testament and the Law of Moses with a very critical perspective, largely through the perspective of the exilic and post-exilic prophets. And it was those Jews who decided their theology and practice had to change. So it's not the fact that we modern Christians have conveniently decided to bin the parts of the Bible we don't like. It's the fact that our very religion originated from Second Temple period Jews who already conducted the theological revisionism which, ironically, we get charged with doing. Next question. Were you aware of Lazerpig's polemic around tanks? Do you know this YouTuber? Yes, I was, and yes, I do, but it's really totally outside my area. I'm not very knowledgeable about military history outside a few very specific topics. I can just about do the Battle of Waterloo. I occasionally watch videos by Lazerpig, Animarchy, Perun, Red Effect, and Cone of Arc, so I am generally familiar with that military history subgroup, but I don't really follow the broader community as a whole. I will shout out Drakenefel, however, an absolutely brilliant naval military historian. Last question. What's your opinion about some historians which large channels such as Insider bring to review films or other media content? I do like it when those programs bring on real historians, and I know personally two professional and highly knowledgeable swordsmen, David Rawlings, who has been brought on to Insider to review swordplay in movies and TV, and Matt Easton, who has been brought onto IGN to review swordplay in video games. They are both really lovely guys, and as a practitioner of historical swordsmanship myself, I visited their clubs in the UK, trained and sparred with their members, even received some training from Dave himself. I have a lot of respect for both of them, and I thought they did an excellent job of presenting historical facts in an accessible way in their respective appearances. I also want to mention Tobias Catwell, who has been on one of these programs. He's an absolutely brilliant historian of arms and armor of the medieval period. I'd say he's probably considered one of the greatest experts on the subject in the world, and that is not even an exaggeration. Any appearance of his in those programs is definitely well worth watching. But sometimes professionals are brought on as talking heads for sound bites to support a narrative or fill in space which should have been occupied with proper research, and that's very bad. I'll be demonstrating an example of that in a video later this year. Thank you again for all your questions and comments, and thank you again for all your support. I hope you have a good holiday season. Personally, I'm aiming to get more sleep.